Yeah, good morning, Fight View 360 fans. It's your old mate Big J here, and today I've got myself another boxing commentator and a bit of a boxing guru, Fox Sports commentator Paul Upham. Thanks for joining us here today, Paul.
Morning, Jason.
How are you, mate?
I'm good. Any time to talk about boxing is a good time.
Oh, absolutely. So, just give us a bit of a background into yourself. You've been working for Fox Sports for as long as I can remember. Just give us a little bit back about you and what you actually do for Australian boxing.
Well, I've been covering Australian boxing for 20 years now. I started back in '99. I started writing for a website, Boxing Press, and then they merged with secondsout.com in 2000. And I was basically with Seconds Out for a decade, covering not just Australian boxing, but world boxing. I got to do a lot of travelling and go to some of the big fights in the UK and the USA and Japan. And then I stepped back at the end of 2010. I had some other projects I wanted to go and work on, so I sort of stepped away from secondsout.com. Still always liked the guys there, but it was just a work thing, because once you get on the boxing world carousel, sometimes it's hard to get off. So I stepped away from that, and since then, still do some work for Fox Sports News and Fox Sports, and sort of when people ask me to do one-off projects here and there, do a lot of radio interviews and do some work for SBS television. So yeah, still in there, still helping Australian boxing and the Australian boxers any way I can, but I'm not covering the sport, like you guys are 24/7 every day of the week like I used to.
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, but Australian boxing's come in leaps and bounds, and certainly in the last 20 years, and in large in part to the big switch of Anthony Mundine. You were actually there when that happened, correct? When he actually switched from... were you part of the media scrum that happened when he announced from switching from league to boxing?
Yeah, it was all around that. It was a big time, and looking back, it's still an amazing decision that he made. He was a top line NRL player on huge money, and at the age of 25 decided that he was going to quit rugby league and go to boxing, and even his dad Tony queried him at the time whether he was making the right decision or not, because there's no guarantees in boxing, no contracts, no guaranteed money. So, and he had to sort of start from the beginning, and he was such a success, not just for him but for Australian boxing, the way he lifted the profile of the sport up. He fought in all the states of Australia over his career. He gave a lot of opportunities to guys on undercards to make a name for themselves, and obviously that rivalry with Danny Green, will go into the history of Australian sport as one of the most greatest rivalries in sport. And I always described it as it was boxing's version of Holden versus Ford. That first fight when they had the Sydney Football Stadium, 30,000 people. Even if you didn't see the fight, you're interested to know who won the next morning. It was such a big sporting event. It wasn't just a boxing match; it was a unique sporting rivalry that I don't think we'll see anytime soon. I'm not sure when we're going to have 30,000 people outdoors at Sydney Football Stadium next time. So it was a great event, and for Anthony, I don't know that he ever got the true credit he deserved for what he did, because I think he had a couple of amateur fights as a youngster, and obviously he was exposed to boxing because of his father Tony. Was a very, very good Australian fighter. It's a Commonwealth champion, challenged the great Carlos Monzon for the world title, middleweight world title. But to be a rugby league professional and then at 25 to turn to boxing and achieve what he did, I think it's unique, because you very rarely see anyone around the world be able to get to the top in two sports.
Yeah, absolutely. So with the how would you compare the boxing scene now compared to 10 years ago? So are we, because I know that there's more public knowledge about boxing, there's more there's more media coverage. I mean, there's more people that are more interested in the sport, not just in the country but worldwide, and people like us, making worldwide through the uses of technology. Obviously, YouTube and all that have helped us out to no end. There's more media coverage now than ever. But how do you think the actual quality of Australian boxing is going now to, say, 10, 20, 30 years ago, when like the Fennec, the Lester and the Michael, was like our golden age? What do you think about it now?
Well, it's actually interesting how it's sort of gone up and down over the years. In the early '80s, boxing, was sort of struggling in Australia, and then, as you mentioned, Jeff Fennick came along, and Mike Tyson came along on the world scene, and back then we used to get, the Mike Tyson heavyweight fights on free-to-air television. I remember watching them on Channel 9 at the time, and that sort of lifted the sport up into the early '90s, and then Costa Tszyu came along, and Costa had a great run and carried us into the next decade. And I actually did a book called Undisputed on that decade from 2000 to 2010, and I actually argued that was one of the best eras of Australian boxing, and probably certainly the best we had since the 60s and 70s. You had obviously the Mundine Green rivalry, as we mentioned. We had the end of the Costa Tszyu's career as the undisputed champion. Victor Tinian became the undisputed world champion as well. At super flyweight, and then we had a lot of other guys, support guys like Sakio Victor and Love Dadu and Gary Sinclair, who won world title belts. And then we had the influx in 2000 from the Olympics of a lot of guys who turned professional here and sort of lifted that sport. So I thought it was a really good decade. And then going on to the next decade, after the Green Mundine rivalry, after the second fight, that sort of dimmed down boxing again. And now we just seem to be having some guys, again coming through, obviously with the Mundine brothers, contending for world titles this year and winning them. And Tim Tszyu now sort of carrying the mantle on from Jeff Horn. Jeff Horn had that great win over Manny Pacquiao, which I had as many inquiries from, general media, not just sporting media, general media, to talk about Manny Pacquiao and Jeff Horn as any other fight probably since the first Mundine Green. There was a lot of interest in Jeff Horn, and particularly when he won. That was so good for Jeff Horn and so good for Australian boxing. And obviously Jeff had a couple of good wins, and then now he's lost to Tim Tszyu, and the rise of Tim Tszyu. Tim looked really, really impressive against Jeff Horn, and he's only 25, so we'd like to think he's got some good years ahead of him. And then with the Mundine brothers coming on with some big fights this year, I think it's a good time right now for Australian boxing. Look, the more people we can open the sport up to, obviously women are half the population in Australia, so we need to be showcasing our female fighters. And it was good the other night for people who got the Tszyu Horn card. You saw Shannon O'Connell on the undercard, winning the Australian Super Bantamweight title. I remember back many years ago when Sharon Anyos, won the WBC world title. She was sort of a pioneer for Australian boxing, and Sharon needs to get the sort of recognition she deserves, because she had some good fights there, and she represented Australia well, won the WBC world title, and it's time for more women to come along. And women's boxing is not for everybody. I understand that, but the women who want to compete, they're very dedicated. They don't get the money or the media attention that they deserve for what they put in, and hopefully people seeing Shannon O'Connell win the other night on the undercard can open up a few doors, and we can have a few more women come through and lift up the sport, because the guys can't do it by themselves. We need the women out there as well competing for Australia.
Oh, exactly. I mean, if you look at the UFC, Amanda Nunes is probably the biggest star in the UFC, successor to Ronda Rousey. I mean, Ronda come along and changed the face of, sport, not just UFC, but sport in general. She was a phenomenon. And when she her star took off, she was arguably the biggest bankable star for the UFC. Now it's arguably Amanda Nunes, along with probably the heavyweights and John Jones. But women's sport in general has just come in leaps and bounds the last 20 years. I mean, especially in this country, we've got the AFL Women's League now. We've got the NRL Rugby League. We've got Taylor Harris, who's a she does both dabbles in boxing and AFL. So it's going in leaps and bounds for women's sport in general. And who do you think is the one to look? Who do you think is the number one to look out for in Australian boxing at the moment? I mean, obviously, Tim's very much a very exposed name now, thanks to the victory over Jeff the other day. But who do you think else there, along with the Maloney twins, is the one that Australian boxing really should be keeping their eyes on?
Well, obviously now all the attention will be on Tim Tszyu because of what he achieved, and that had a lot of attention in Australia, and so his name is going to be out now. And obviously, having having his father, we've had such a great reputation as well. People are going to sort of connect straight away. And big time sport is about having that fan connection, identifying who the people are and the personalities, and coming to terms with what they offer. And Tim's name's obviously going to be a lot bigger out there. Whether that translates into world title success and wins, we have to wait and see. But every time I see Tim fight, he's improving a lot, and he's using the Tszyu boxing system to get better. Jason Maloney's now got a big opportunity. He's going to fight the Japanese superstar Inui. Looks like on October 31 in the USA. And a lot of people consider Inui to be either the top 1, 2, or 3 in the world pound for pound. So that is a massive fight for Jason Maloney. Look, it's not an easy win for him, but if he were to win, that would catapult him right up to the top 10 of of world boxing as well as Australian boxing. So I always say, the hardest things for boxers is not to win the fights, but to make the fights. Because there's so much politics in boxing, and you can't do it without having the backing of a good promoter, and the Maloney brothers having the backing of top rank, Bob Arum, the Hall of Fame promoter. It makes it so much easier to make fights and get opportunities. And, these opportunities are once in a lifetime. We were very lucky over many years, when Glenn Kelly got a chance to get the great Roy Jones Jr. when he was pound for pound and won, and Shannon Taylor fought Shane Mosley. A lot of people thought he was pound for pound and won. They didn't win, but they're once in a lifetime opportunities. So for Jason Maloney to get this fight with the Japanese, great Inui in America with the world watching, you can't buy that sort of exposure and opportunity to do that. So, if Jason could win that fight, that would catapult him, right to the top of world boxing.
Mm-hmm.
Right now with Tim, some people overseas, they don't sort of consider the win over Jeff Horn such a big thing that maybe some of the Australians do, because Jeff Horn, he gets a little disrespect over, particularly in the USA, because of Teddy Atlas's comments. A lot of people thinking he didn't win against Manny Pacquiao, and then he didn't look good against Terence Crawford when he lost the world title. And again, no shame in losing to Terence Crawford, because he's one of the best in the world pound for pound right now with Inui. So there's some people obviously in America who don't sort of give much credit to Jeff Horn, so they don't think that win with Tim Tszyu is good. But I was impressed with Tim. So obviously Maloney and then Tim Horn. And look, I've got a lot of time for George Kambosos Jr. I remember George as a youngster growing up and boxing out of the Tszyu Boxing Academy in Rockdale in Sydney. He's undefeated. He's got a world title fight coming up as well, a big fight coming up as well in the UK later this year. So, and he's got Lou DiBella, the American promoter, in his corner supporting him, which is great for George. So, I think George is another one you could throw into the mix. So with Tim, Jason, Andrew Maloney, and George Kambosos, there's certainly 4 guys to watch going forward. Jay Opataya, at cruiserweight, he's obviously moving his way through, but I don't know if he's exactly ready for a world title fight yet. And then we need some of the other younger guys to come through. So there's certainly boxing to be followed there for Australian fans, and that's what we need, because boxing it's much more to AFL and rugby league and cricket, where you get a regular menu of the sport week in, week out through their seasons, where boxing is it's a boutique event sport, so you get one-off events. So the Tszyu Horn fight was a one-off event, and then we won't hear boxing again until we hear the next big one-off event, whether that's Jason Maloney or somebody else getting an opportunity. So, we need these guys fighting in significant fights on the world scene to get the media attention, because without that media attention, no one sort of knows that boxing's even happening.
No, yeah, that's exactly right. And, thanks to the technologies that we've got now, it's getting more exposure than ever, and that's only a good thing. So, we can certainly think about that. So, in regards to Jeff Horn, what do you see for him? Or there's a lot of people that say that he should, hang up the gloves, that he's done a fantastic career, that he's got nothing more to prove in the ring. Personally, I think he's done enough. What are your thoughts on Jeff Horn?
Jeff Horn's interesting because he's only 32. He's not old.
No.
He could certainly carry on for a few more years and be, a force at super welterweight. The problem is that, once you start taking that sort of punishment that he has in recent fights, and look, if you look back now, he won the title against Manny Pacquiao, and he defended it, and then he went to America and he lost to Terence Crawford and was beaten badly. And at that stage, I don't think he could make welterweight comfortably anymore. So I understood why he didn't look so good against Crawford. But Terence Crawford's Crawford, so he didn't do well. Then he came back and he had a one-round, quick win over Anthony Mundine, who was way past his best. Then he had the 2 fights with Michael Zarafa, when lost badly the first fight, was losing badly the second fight until he pulled that one punch out of nowhere to have an amazing win. So, if you take the Mundine fight out, and if Zarafa finishes him off, he could have really had, 4 losses in a row when you tack on the Tszyu fight there. So, he's had some punishment in the ring, and if he's going to continue on, what I said the day after the fight on Fox Sports News is, he's got to rethink his training, whether he brings another co-trainer in, or whether he, moves on from Glenn Rushton and brings a new trainer in. I don't know whether he'd be interested in doing that. They seem to have a very good close relationship. But, maybe Rushton has taken him as far as he can right now, and he needs to do something differently if he's going to continue on. Again, he decides to retire, all praise to him for what he's achieved in his career. Not much else to do. He did it, made a lot of money for when he started coming out of the Olympics. Because, people got to remember, the reason he got the Manny Pacquiao fight was he was seen by Bob Arum, the promoter, on the undercard on one of Joseph Parker's fights in New Zealand, and they thought, wow, he'd be good opponent for Manny Pacquiao, not realising that he'd actually win the fight. So, look, it's up to Jeff's got to make that decision, but it's got to be a carefully considered decision. But if he does go forward, he's got to make some changes. It's just not about training harder, and pushing yourself more. He's got to train smarter.
Yeah, absolutely. And whatever he does, we'll support him. But we'll see what happens with Jeff Horn, because I remember, you'll remember when Sam Solomon got badly beaten by Anthony Mundine in 07. They thought he was done, and then Sam Solomon won a world title at 40. So, that was an amazing achievement by Sam. Can Jeff do the same thing? Who knows? I hope that he just, I hope he gives it away, because he's had a fantastic career. I don't think he needs to do any more, but it's up to him. So, but we'll see what happens with that. But on more pressing matters, with Tszyu, Patrick Teixeira's name's been thrown around, and obviously, I believe that he's been. I've been told that he's got a signed fight, a mandatory against Brian Cascinato, the Argentina fighter. COVID's obviously mucked a lot of things up. Do you think he'll get a world title shot within 2 or 3 fights, or do you think his management will he have another domestic fight, or what do you think they'll do? Because Mixerafa's name's been mentioned, and I think that's a very tough fight for Tszyu. Mixerafa, considering he's not ranked and he has no belt or anything like that. What do you think that they would do next?
Look, obviously they're going to try and get the best fight for Tim. He proved the other night that there is a marketable commodity in his name out there, and he fought so well and he was so impressive. The reports were he did over 100,000 pay-per-view home sales, which is fantastic for someone of Tim's stature at this stage of his career after 16 fights. Look, I don't think they turn the world title fight down if it was offered to them. I don't think Tim's that far away, but there's a lot of dangerous super welterweights competing over in the USA, which I think would be tough fights for Tim right now. I think he needs some step-ups in levels in fights, and that's the biggest problem for Australian guys going forward, is when they step up to that next level over in the USA, it's a bit of a step up, and quite often they're not able to make it. Costa Tszyu used to bring top 10 guys over to spar when he had his training camps in Australia, but he was obviously given the money to do that through the Showtime network as part of his contract. And I was encouraged that Tim went over and did some sparring with Manny Pacquiao. That one, he got asked to do, but two, that he went over and did that. And I think that's good that Tim needs to be able to do that going forward, improve his sparring. But look, if they can make the world title fight, whether it's the end of this year or early next year, I'm sure they'll want to do that. I know Main Event of Fox Sports will want to see Tim in significant fights. And obviously, the bigger the fights, the more financial return there is. And I think the best thing to come out of that Tszyu Horn fight was the message that was sent to the rest of the world that, we're open for business. We can put fights on here with crowds. That still can't be done in many places around the world right now. We saw in the USA and the UK, recently where they've had a lot of fights with no crowds in bubbles. So I think, if you want to be making decent money, you're still going to have a crowd. And that's why there's still question marks. Even someone like Tyson Fury, there's a big question mark about whether him and the Wilder fight, the third fight's going to happen, or whether they can do the fight with Anthony Joshua in the UK, because they're not going to have the fight until they maximise the return. If they can't have a crowd, they can't maximise the return. So that's why some of these fights aren't even scheduled at this stage, because people still don't know what's going to happen. So with Tszyu, I certainly think they'd like him to fight again before Christmas, whether it's a world title fight or another fight. It can only help his development, because he needs to keep fighting regularly. He's been trying to have 4 fights a year, so if he can get another one in now. Obviously, we had a break earlier this year because of the COVID pandemic. So, I just think that the opportunity's there. You can bring guys in, put them in quarantine, put them in a training camp from overseas into Australia, and make these fights. And Queensland's open to having these fights, and they'd certainly go back to Townsville, no doubt about it. So that was the best thing, is that we showed the world that we can have fights here with crowds. And we had a little discussion before this interview, Jason, where I suggested to you that while we're talking, there's people out there right now, all sections of the world, trying to make a big fight for Tszyu, whether it's a world title fight or another fight, because there's money to be made. And if you can get paid $1 million, there'll be people trying to work out how to make that happen.
No, that's exactly right. Well, I mean, things for Australian boxing are looking pretty good at the moment, and it's just a fantastic time, and we'll all wait and see. And once we get past this COVID thing, I mean, Aussie boxing's going to explode on the world scene. Because we've got George Kapowas Jr., whose fight has been delayed again with Lee Shelby, but he's almost a mandatory for the IBF title. We've got Liam Paro at 140, who's ranked number 2 of the WBO. We've got the Maloney twins. We've got Susie Ramadan chasing her unification bout. I've heard Shanika Johnson and Emily Bridges might be fighting for a world title. Things are looking pretty good at the moment. It's a very exciting place to be. So
It is, but we've got to keep winning, because, to stay on top in boxing, you've got to be perfect. You've got to keep winning. So these Australian fighters, 1, they've got to keep winning, but 2, they've got to get the fights that they need, the most important fights, and that's why you need promoters behind them who can open the doors. So, look, it is a potentially really exciting time for Australian boxing, and let's just hope we can see a few big more fights before Christmas.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for joining us here, Paul Upham. Thanks, Fight View 360 fans. This is your old mate, Big J. Like and subscribe.